Hey everybody, how you doing? This is Dan Blanchard with the Traveling Time with Dan show, where we mix travel with history, with leadership, and of course with me, Dan Blanchard. Today I am in Salem, Massachusetts. Not to talk to you about the witches. We all know about the witches of Salem, Massachusetts. But today I am in Salem, Massachusetts, sharing with you the true power of Salem that not many people knew and understood, at least in the present day, how the true power used to lay in the deep water harbor and the many, many inlets that allowed the Salem boats to hide, like the privateers, the pirates to hide. Yes, today I am talking about the Salem, Massachusetts pirates and how this was the unofficial headquarters of the New England pirates. Yes, a place known for witches was also known for pirates. Now, one of the motivating forces behind this, you could say it maybe came by accident. It's called British Navigation Acts. Now, if you know your history, you know that Britain was in deep debt after the 7 Years' War, which some people call World War I or World War Zero, right? They were in deep debt. They needed to collect money, so they installed upon the colonies of America a thing called the Navigation Acts that said the only boats the colonies can use, all of our goods have to go on British boats and have to go through British ports, which allowed the British to tax us and the British to make some money to try to pay down their war debts, right? So these Navigation Acts were supposed to help Britain get out of the debt from the 7 Years' War. Now, to Salem, this didn't look like it's a good thing. This looked like a threat. It was a threat to Salem's profits, right? And there was a merchant class that was doing very well in Salem, and they did not want their profits to be threatened, all right? Matter of fact, they kind of saw the British trade laws as more like suggestions instead of laws. They weren't exactly going to follow it. I mean, their local economy was tied to the busy port they had here, harbor they had here, and of course it was tied to pirate gold as well. And these Navigation Acts just increased their desire to work with the Red Seamen, right, during the golden age of piracy. Right? The black market allowed them to get their goods for much, much cheaper than dealing and going through the British. Right? The black market was way cheaper for them, so they could keep their profit margins up. And these Salem quasi-privateers, sometimes they were privateers, sometimes they were pirates, just kind of depending on the paperwork and the timing of everything, right? They weren't just used by the fringes of society. This cheaper stuff was really, really used, right, enjoyed by the upper class. The upper class in Salem, well, you would not expect. You know, the clergy even, right? The rich merchants, right, the ones that are doing very well. They really, really liked what the pirates and the privateers were doing and giving them cheap stuff, keeping their economy flourishing, and allowing them to make all sorts of money. So it was the upper class was definitely involved with this. And a lot of this, again, I told you, the lines were blurred many times between pirates or privates, or pirates or privateers, depending on like the paperwork, the timing, and all that stuff. And one of the most famous examples of that blurred line was Captain William Kidd. He's an infamous example of the blurred line. I mean, he was originally hired as a privateer to go out and hunt down pirates, but he found it more profitable to actually become a pirate, among other circumstances as well. He becomes a pirate, a very, very famous one, and he picks up on that Red Sea route, the pirates route there, okay? Now, the Salem Maritime, the Salem Maritime Outlawed was basically integrated in the social fabric. Again, they were sitting here spending their money in Salem, keeping Salem's economy bursting, right? They were like involved in the shops. They were buying shops, working the shops themselves, right? They were marrying into the upper class. They were just tied into the Salem Maritime Outlaw was just tied into the social fabric here. And the evidence is still around today as you look around Salem and you see some of the mansions here are actually come from the wealth generated back during that time. So it's social fabric tied right into the social fabric, right? And many people know, I mean, everybody knows pretty much this is where the witches are, but some people know that Salem was actually the headquarters, or maybe the unofficial headquarters, but nonetheless the headquarters of the New England pirates. This was an extremely busy port, you know, and unlike Boston, which was heavily guarded and watched by the British, with all the inlets here, this one was much, much more difficult for the English to watch, and it was a lot of ways for the Salem people to work around what the British were trying to do, right? But it didn't mean the pirates always got away with it. Every now and then they had to crack down at least a little bit, and one of the famous ones is the pirate trials of John Quelch and his crew, right? They got caught, tried here in the colonies, and convicted. And it was just like the colonies' way of trying to appease England. Hey, we are cracking down on this. But here's the thing, though. The whole pirates, privateer thing, dealing with the English navigation acts, I mean, it's not so simple. It's not just black and white as good versus bad. It's not that simple, right? This whole era of the privateers, the pirates, you know, dealing with the British, all that, it was much, much more complicated than that. All right, very, very complicated. All right, so now, here's the interesting thing is, when the Salem privateers, pirates, when they were using these inlets and circumventing the British law and networking, right, and doing all these things, of course, the British were going to get really mad, and they created these Vice-Admiralty courts where there was no jury, and the colonists believed that that was their right. They had every right to have a jury. Don't you dare send it back to England to be tried. But England did. And that angered the colonists big time and united them even more than the taxes that were being put on them, right? Now, the English were in a bad situation because the English knew that the Salem juries were not going to convict their own people. So they kind of had to send it to England. But by sending it to England, again, you're going to anger and unite the Salem people against you. And they're going to develop these networks, right? And that's just kind of how it goes. So now the interesting thing also is, you know, they create this underground network, the colonists, this underground network to unite themselves, to fight back, to join up, and they're going to fight back against the English. And believe it or not, a bunch of years later, during the American Revolutionary War, some of this blueprint is still going to be known by some of the people around, the inlets to hide, the underground network, all that, the resistance. Right? It's all going to be still known by some of the people that are around, and Salem's basically going to become a blueprint for the colonial resistance during the American Revolutionary War, right? Which is really interesting. Again, England was in a tough spot. You know, they needed some money. They wanted to crack down, but they got to crack down in a way that doesn't anger the colonists too much, and they just couldn't seem to do it. They couldn't seem to just get it right, the right formula. They angered the colonists here in Salem, got them to unite and put a fire in their belly to fight back, right? And that's going to be beneficial much, much later during the American Revolutionary War. Now, you know, whenever I do travel on Time with Dan, I mix travel with history and with leadership. I've talked to you a little bit about the history. If you have not been down to Salem, definitely come down to Salem. I mean, obviously, definitely check out the witches too, but don't just check out the witches. Make sure you also check out the pirates. There's multiple museums here where you can check out the pirates. So this is definitely a cool place to come and see it, the pirates. And leadership. What's my leadership lesson today? My leadership lesson is this, right? You ready for this? All right. Leaders reward legal activities to discourage corruption. Okay? I want you to think about this. Do you accept short-term gains from questionable behavior, or do you protect the long-term health of your community by enforcing standards and the laws? Now, yeah, sometimes it's easier to make money in the short term doing questionable things, right? And I'm not judging the pirates or the privateers right now, or Salem, not judging them at all. You know what I'm saying? But think about this, the age of the piracy is going to go bye-bye. It's not going to last forever. So you can't be thinking about just short-term stuff. You also have to be thinking about long-term stuff. And many times, that long-term goal is going to conflict with the short-term profits. So just keep that in mind. This is something leaders have to weigh when they're making their leadership decisions. All right, everybody. Thank you for spending some time with me today on the Travel on Time with Dan show, where we mix travel with history and with leadership. And, of course, me, Dan Blanchard. I'll be back real soon with another great episode. Till then, you take care.